welcome to our... Sorry, let me restart. I don't know where my audio is coming from. Hi, welcome to week 4. I've got a couple of housekeeping things, and then we're just going to get right into the lecture. So, first things first, our exam is this Friday, September 20th. Again, it will be on Brightspace. You just log into Brightspace. It opens at midnight. It closes at midnight. You have all day to do it, and there's no time limit. Like, it's not going to log you out after an hour. Take as long as you want. You have all day. Open it when you want. However, it is closed note. And again, there's a proctor. You'll be, recorded. And if it indicates that you're looking down or it indicates that you're looking around, it will ping it, and then I will have to review the footage. I don't want to do that. You don't want me to do that. Just please study. You also cannot have any additional browsers or any extra tabs open, and it will run a check of your computer to make sure that you don't. So if you have questions about that specifically, let me know. If you haven't looked at our study guide yet, you really should be. I'll show you where this is at in Brightspace, but by this point I would hope that you know. So here is our study guide. All of the things that will be on your exam. Remember, there's multiple choice, and then there is true and false. I don't know why. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Friday, and then your Federalist papers are due next week. I'll go over those as well. So if you're on the home page, right, here we are. Here's everything. Content. Study guides. Exam 1 study guide. Here it is. It'll just pull up right here, and you can just see it. You could download it, you could print it, you could write on it, whatever helps you study. In terms of the Federalist papers, you can find them in 2 places. So if you go to Homeworks and Assignments, and then go to Federalist 10, it will pull up for you. Federalist 51, it will pull up for you. And then the Federalist papers is your actual questions. There's only 10 questions total. You can also go to Assignments, and if you click on this, nope, it's gonna take me to all of your submissions. I hate that it does that. If you click on it, it will just show you this information. I just have to hit edit. So if you click on the assignment, it'll pull up with these attachments. This is the same thing, just Federalist 10, 51, and then the questions. You can do it however you want. You can download a Google Doc, write your answers in, and then upload. You can write your answers in right here in your little text box. You can do a Google or a Microsoft Word. I don't care how you submit it. You can even just email me the questions if you want. If you email me a Google Doc, please make sure that you've gone up into the top right, and when you hit share, make sure you have selected that anyone with the link can view and edit. If you don't do that, then I can't access your homework, which is annoying for all of us. So make sure you're doing that if you're going to give me a Google Doc, email it to me. Also, remember, similar to our first homework, if you don't actually put something in the Dropbox, it will tell you it's late, because Brightspace can't tell if you've emailed me or if you did a Google form, right? Brightspace is only able to detect whether or not something was turned in to their Dropbox. So if you email it to me, Brightspace is going to tell you it's late. It's obviously not late if you got it to me before the midnight. And I'll just put the grades in, and once I put the grade in, it'll stop telling you that the assignment's late. So I try to do that as soon as possible. But remember, this is next week. That's your assignment for next week. This week, on Friday, you have your exam. And I believe when you just open Brightspace, the exam should be either here or also up in your assignments. It might very well be this thick. I don't input these. I send them, and then staff inputs them. So I don't actually input these, so I don't know what this is. I'm pretty sure this is your exam. So either come up here to assessments, go to assignments, and then scroll down to the very end, and it will be here, and you'll be able to see it. Otherwise, it should just be on your homepage. It might be here, it might be on one of these side things. But if you have any issues, let me know. I believe that is all I have for housekeeping. I lied. Sorry. Here is obviously the information from the debate. You have until this Friday, also the day of the exam. I recommend that you do it before then, because I'd like you to focus on the exam. But if you wanted to write up a little report on the presidential debate between former President Trump and then Vice President Harris, you can do that. You can talk about whatever you want. You can talk about what your opinions were. You can talk about the policies they talked about. You can just give a timeline, the questions, and how they answered them, how they acted towards each other, how they acted towards the moderators, what you thought about there not being... Usually there's always a live audience for these debates, and obviously this time there wasn't. This is also, I believe, the first time that the mics were muted when the candidate wasn't talking. So there were a lot of things that were done a little differently for this debate than usual. So yeah, if you want to give in a page or two about what you thought, I don't have any other requirements. I don't have a rubric for you. I mean, the font should be normal sized. The font should be readable. It can be single or double spaced. I don't really care. I really just want you to prove to me that you watched the actual whole debate. So if you're giving enough detail, the double spaced isn't going to change that. I'm not grading you on whether you turned in 1 or 2 pages. I'm grading you on the content of the paper. But yeah, that's due Friday. So you still have a week if you'd like to do that. You can just email it to me. There's not a Dropbox here, just because it's not required. And if I make a Dropbox, then it will tell everyone that it's required. So just email it to me. Or you can just do it in Google Docs and then send the link to me on Discord, preferably a private message, not in the big group. But again, if you're sharing a Google Doc, make sure that anyone with the link can view and edit, so I can give you feedback. Perfect. And then, one more thing. I haven't checked our movie thing yet. Okay, almost everyone's done this, so amazing. It looks like Spotlight won, with just a couple of more responses. So we'll do Spotlight for a movie assignment. A movie assignment isn't due for a few more weeks. There's this syllabus, yeah. Movie assignment isn't due until, we've got a while. October 25th, but I just wanted to put it out there. I want it to be available to you early. So what you should start doing now is looking at the streaming service that it's on, seeing if you have it. The questions, I believe, are already uploaded. Let me just make sure. So really, you could do it super early and just be done with it if you'd like. The questions are not uploaded. I will just upload those. I'll just put them right here in homeworks and assignments. Actually, can I do that now? This is a little complicated. I'll do it later. I'll do it right after I post this. So the questions will be here under homeworks and assignments. So since we have a month, here's what you should do. Look at the streaming service it's on. It's on all of the above: HBO, Hulu, Amazon, Apple TV. You can also just rent it. Check all of those. See if you have them. I would recommend watching early. Obviously, the assignment's not due for a month, so you don't have to. But you can get it done. I'd also recommend maybe going online and doing some researching. Read a couple of reviews. Read a little synopsis. There's not really any spoilers you can get for this because it's a true story and it happened already, and etc. So you're not going to get any spoilers. So read a synopsis, maybe read the plot, and just like make sure that you're comfy with it. Obviously there was a lot of split here, like this is less than half of the class. So I would hate for this to be representative of the entire class, and I expect that a lot of people may be uncomfy with the content. I also expect a lot of people might not be able to access the content. If you can't access it, aka you don't have any of the streaming services above, email me or message me on Discord privately and we can chat about that. If you're uncomfy with the content material, again, we're talking Catholicism, we're talking child abuse, trigger warning for sexual abuse. This movie does not show anything. You're never seeing, it's only ever discussed. So you're not seeing anything, it's just talked about, but obviously, like, that's some heavy, hard-hitting stuff, and some people might be uncomfortable with that. Totally get that. So if you're uncomfortable with it as well, again, just feel free to email me or message me privately on Discord, and we'll figure something else out. Perfect. Cool. That's all I have for housekeeping. If you have any questions about any of the above, let me know. Quick recap. Exams on Friday. It's on Brightspace. Multiple choice, true and false. It is proctored. You have all day to do it. Only available on Friday. Next Friday is your Federalist Papers. You have to read 10 and 51 and then answer 10 questions, 5 from each. Excuse me. And we chose Spotlight. If for some reason you can't access it or you're uncomfortable with it, talk to me privately. That's all I got for that. So now, if you remember correctly, right, we already did the introduction to our government, we did the history, and then we talked about citizenship and ideology. These are the 3 PowerPoints that are on your exam. So now we're going to start the 4th one, which admittedly I forget which one of these it is. Media. Okay, so we're going to do media first. I'm so sorry. I'm apparently exhausted. This starts our next exam. So our second exam will have media, federalism, and then Congress. So this whole PowerPoint is not on your first exam. Remember to keep those separate. Okay. So we're going to talk about the American media. We'll talk about the sources of our news, the implications of the news, the role of journalists, and then the link between media, politicians, citizens, politics, government, how they're all intertwined. I want to go back again real quick just to talk about when everyone was submitting their homeworks, their course pre-quiz homework, and feeling kind of shy and almost embarrassed about getting their news from social media. I think that's a valid way to get your news. I think that's a great way to get your news. Obviously, social media is using algorithms and AI and like how you interact to show you things that you're probably going to be interested in. There's no better way to get news than things that you're probably already interested in. So I think that's fine. I don't think anyone should be embarrassed about it. I get a lot of my news from social media. I think how we regulate that, though, because obviously media is just, or social media, people can just get on there and put whatever they want, is to just check that. right? If you see a tweet about something you're interested in, do a quick Google search, right? Like a couple of keywords and see what comes up. If you see a TikTok about it, a lot of times TikToks will link news articles, but if they don't, do a quick Google search, see what everyone's talking about. And if you're going to go that far, click on more than one article, like don't just click on a CNN article or a Fox article. Maybe read both. Maybe read the local news. Local news is often a little less biased than our big national news services. So read the local news and see what the local news is saying. There's nothing wrong with getting, especially current events, from social media. There is something wrong with following it blindly. So our first lesson is the idea that media doesn't tell us what to think. Media tells us what to think about, right? So when we are thinking about this, we're thinking about the fact that there are a million things happening every single day that we just don't hear about. Not because it's not important or not because people don't care, but because media isn't reporting on it. And the things that this controversy of like, oh, well, media is going to tell you how to think. It can't, right? Because you can get multiple different viewpoints. You can get a lot of ideological inputs from different news sources. If you're only looking at one news source, of course they're going to give you a more biased opinion. But if you utilize all of your available resources, they can't tell you what to think. They can only tell you what to think if you're letting them, right? What it is doing is giving us stories. And if the media isn't reporting on something, they're not telling people that it happened, then no one's going to know what happened. This is obviously a little less accurate nowadays, where social media is so prevalent, and if one person is making a TikTok about something and then that TikTok becomes viral, now everyone's making a TikTok about it. But even then, right, like media itself may not report on it until it already becomes big and people are already talking about it. We can look at things like the situation in Belarus right now. Belarus is having some internal conflict, a lot of protests, a lot of issues with their leader. Excuse me. And this isn't something that we're seeing circulate, right, on like our typical media news sources. If you're looking for it, right, you'll find some tweets and you'll find some TikToks and you'll find some social media posts about it, but this isn't something that everyone's talking about on CNN and MSNBC and Fox. You have to look for this kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that it's not happening, nor does it mean, especially, that media is telling you what to think about it, because they're not telling you anything. Do you see where I'm coming with that? This is a big point that will show up on our exam. This will show up throughout the semester, similar to the distinguish idea between ideology and political party, right? Like they are not the same thing. This will come up like that. Media doesn't tell us what to think. It tells us what to think about. So historical trends of the media, obviously, the media used to serve as a gatekeeper, and they were fact-checking with credible sources. So we're looking at Watergate. We're looking at the Catholic priest scandal that Spotlight is about. And they had a responsibility to high standards and minimizing bias, the gatekeepers of government. So when you watch Spotlight, again, there's discussion of the conflict or the scandal happening, but most of the movie is actually just about how media is trying to uncover this, and they're getting a couple of accounts, and their editor won't let them publish anything because these aren't credible sources. You can't fact check this. No one else can go back over your work. It's just a couple of people. Where is this coming from? We can't accuse the entire Catholic Church of doing this if we don't have actual backing. And so the entire movie is really about this group of journalists and how they're just consistently finding more and more information until they have enough information to publish. The Post is also similar to this, where it's about the Pentagon Papers and how the Pentagon Papers were published. And originally it was published, I believe, by the New York Times. And the New York Times got sued from the government. The government sued them, basically, for putting this paper out for endangering Americans. And so the Post is about really fact-checking what the New York Times was claiming was happening with the Pentagon Papers, and fact-checking where this information was coming from, and if it was credible, and if it was credible, were they allowed to publish it, and where are they getting the information, and they get their lawyers involved, whether or not they're going to be sued. And so for all of these media movies I'm showing you, it's really to emphasize this, that media is intended to act as a gatekeeper, and they can't or shouldn't be able to just go around publishing whatever willy-nilly they want. Originally, like, you would have multiple sources. You often had to name your sources, which is why a lot of things often weren't disclosed, because sources weren't willing to be named. You'd have private sources, all because media had these high standards, and their entire purpose, the whole goal, was to gatekeep government and make sure that government was being held accountable, and make sure that government wasn't able to do whatever they want and never be held accountable or never be exposed. People would find out about what they were doing. Today, media is owned by corporate conglomerates, and they're primarily looking for profit. And oftentimes they're monopolizing other corporations. I'm not going to ask you the details of this law. I also don't really need you to remember the year of this law, but you should be aware of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which is the law that essentially allowed media to monopolize. That's basically it. In your exam, I believe it's worded just like that. What allowed media conglomerates to monopolize? Telecommunications Act of 1996. But they're all doing it for profit, right? And I think what a lot of people don't talk about oftentimes is that the news media now, you'll see them running the same stories over and over again at different time intervals because it's getting views. And that's why sometimes they won't report on things, right? Like, not a lot of Americans are in tune with what's happening in Belarus. So if a news station is reporting on Belarus, they're probably not going to get a big audience. They don't have a big audience, they're not getting a lot of views. They don't have a lot of views, they're not getting paid. So they really need to hone in on what is pulling an audience in, what is attractive to people. This is where we get the idea of infotainment, or like media serving as entertainment. And that we'll come back to that in a second. But generally, right, like, we're no longer looking at them to gatekeep our government and to hold our government accountable. We're looking at them to entertain us. That's why a lot of news stations have like whole entire classifications as being entertainment. Oftentimes accuracy is irrelevant, and this is because of the 24-hour news cycle, which creates instant news and pushes topics out of headlines. So what does that look like? We'll come back to that. Our news is one big circle, right? Something's really only in the news for about 24 hours, and you have 24 hours to get all that you're going to get out of it, to squeeze it dry, to get your audience involved and paying attention and watching. And then once they've heard it once, now it's irrelevant, right? I know what's happening. I'm good. I'm gone. So you have to think of something else to pull this audience in. And you usually have to do it very quickly. And obviously a lot of our government is working, and bills are getting passed and legislation is happening, especially around the election right now, when things are happening every single day. It's a lot easier. But generally, right, like, there's not a whole ton of actual news happening, and which is why we have to create this news. We have to create instant things. Because you have to keep these audiences engaged. We also have the idea of a commercial bias, which is that we're getting profit from advertisements, so we're going to run the stories that are selling advertisements. Pretty basic idea. Push what sells. And then infotainment, which I just referenced to you, is the idea of dressing the news up to make it more appealing to their audience. So generally, right, we're thinking of CNN as being the more liberal news media and Fox being the conservative news media. And so they're going to work for their audiences. Right? Fox is going to take a different approach to certain things than CNN might take. And it's because CNN is, like, they know that more liberal ideologies are going to watch theirs. And Fox knows that more conservative people are going to watch theirs. And so they're going to dress their news up to make it more appealing to those audiences. And by doing that, we're only pushing further apart, right? Because now people who watch CNN are looking at Fox like, oh my God, can you believe what they're doing? People who watch Fox are looking at CNN like, oh my God, can you believe what they're doing? You know, look at how they're portraying this. When in fairness, both sources are portraying it in a way that will appeal to their audience. Appealing to their audience keeps their audience watching, keeps profit from advertisements. All of this keeps going up. Generally, our media's role in pushing policy or pushing news media happens in two different models. And so the first model is the issue attention cycle, which is generally a 5-stage process, and it looks more like a circle, like a actual cycle. So the first step is the pre-problem stage, which is pretty undesirable for our news media. If there's no problem, if nothing's happening, they have nothing to report on. Then we move into the second stage, which is alarm, discovery, and euphoric enthusiasm. So, oh my God, something happened, and everyone's learning about it, and we're super excited because we get to put it on the news and everyone's going to watch. And then you move into step 3, which is where the actual policy stuff starts to play a part. At step 3, we're realizing the cost of this actual progress, like what it would really take to do something about this problem. Step 4, we're in gradual decline in public interest, right? Because we were all excited, we had something to report on, there was something we could work towards. Then we realized how expensive or how costly in whatever other way, resources or time, it may be to actually fix the problem. Therefore, now we're moving away from it because we're not going to do anything about it. It's too costly. So we have to turn people's attention away. We're going to stop reporting on it. We're going to stop talking about it. And because no one's talking about it, public interest will decline. Step 5, we go into the post-problem stage, which basically leads us right into step 1 again. It's kind of the same thing. We're either post-problem or we're pre-problem. And then both of these are undesirable because nothing is really happening. Number 1, to report on, then we'll bring in an audience. Number 2, to have policy written about. Or number 3, for people to actually be engaged and interested in. A good example of something like this media cycle would be like climate change. Or, I'm going to say climate change. Not to be controversial, but this is really just an example of this cycle, right? So before we became aware of it, we were in a pre-problem stage. Nothing was happening. This is obviously a longer term thing, so I'm sure there were other little things happening, but this wasn't happening. Then we move into discovery, right? So, oh my God, this is happening. There's a hole in the ozone layer or whatever. Everyone's freaked out about it. And then there's euphoric enthusiasm. We're going to fix this. We're going to fix this problem. And news is reporting on it. And people are protesting. And legislators are writing bills. Once we get into that, we move into step 3, where we realize, like, oh my God, this is like a big thing. This is actually huge. It would cost so much money. It would cost so much time. We are not the only country in the world. We probably can't fix this on our own. You're realizing all of these things, like, oh my God, what it would really take to fix the hole in the ozone layer. From there, we're like, okay, we got to move away because we don't have enough money, right? We don't have enough time. We can't make the rest of the world do what we're going to do. Therefore, we're going to move away. So the politicians will stop writing bills about it, the news will stop reporting on it, and then people are declining in public interest. Now, again, this is a more long-term, long-form thing. This is not to say everyone's uninterested, right? People are still protesting climate change. People are still participating. Companies are still coming out with, like, paper straws. Like, the hole in the ozone was significantly decreased after, what was it? Like, people stopped using the aerosol sprays. So, like, this is not to say that the problem goes away and people don't talk about it anymore and that it's not happening. It definitely is still happening. And some people who are very, very passionate about it will keep working on it. These people often join what we call the bureaucracy, which is one of our later lectures. But the general interest, right, everyone talking about it and focusing it on it all the time, that starts to decline. On the other hand, we have what's called the punctuated equilibrium, which looks more like this. So while the issue attention is a big circle, the punctuated equilibrium is more on a graph. And the idea behind this is that social systems exist in a period of stasis, which is stability, and then those are punctuated by shifts of radical change. And the media cycle, using the punctuated equilibrium, often pushes the issues into the public to potentially create change. So a good example of this, right, we're looking at a stable environment and then something changes, and then a stable environment and then something changes, would be, think about, like, the general idea of counterculture and hippie culture and kind of like the war on drugs. And if you put all that together, that would be a really good example of the punctuated equilibrium. So we had a stable environment, right? And then something rapidly changed. Maybe that was the hippie movement, okay? And it caused a lot of controversy, right? There was a lot of media reporting on it. There were a lot of people pushing back against it. People were, like, disowning their children for joining this movement and leaving home. But then it kind of settled in, right? Like, now just some people were living like this and some people weren't. And then it changed a little bit. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. I'm apparently struggling today. And then it changed again, right? Where we had the war on drugs. And so we had this big push of media and news environments and people and politicians. Right now we're, like, really cracking down on drugs. And, like, this is tied into everything. So we're cracking down on counterculture, and we're cracking down on not having a typical job and going to college and doing all of the normal things. And then it kind of settled a little bit, right? And this just keeps happening. And now we're at a point where a lot of states have legalized marijuana. Some states, right, like the state that I'm in, Oregon, actually decriminalized almost every drug for quite some time. This has just been rolled back. This is about to become, like, no longer the case. Drugs will be criminalized again. But for a while, that was the case. So, rapidly changing. Oregon just completely decriminalized all drugs. And it was like that for quite some time. And then people realized the problem with that. It wasn't really working. People weren't, it wasn't opening people up to the safety measures that was originally thought to be. So now they're going to change it again. So everything's cool, everything's stable, everything's chilling, and then something happens. It kind of pushes everything into a new direction. And then we get settled. And then something new happens, and then we get settled. And this is the slow burn of progress. So issue attention is much more quick. You can think about this more like, they're both part of the 24-hour news cycle. Not to say that this is only the 24-hour news cycle, but this is much more closely related, where this happens pretty quickly. The punctuated equilibrium is much more a long-term thing. So now we're going to move into media tactics and like what they're doing to get your attention, what they're doing to rope you in. This is often coming from a dramatized and exaggerated form of the news. They also create pseudo events to fill news, where usually something that wouldn't be a news story becomes a news story because they need something. You can think about situations like, right, like there are multiple wars happening, there are protests happening every day, like there's a lot of stuff happening. But instead, we're going to write a news article about the shoes that a politician is wearing. Or we're going to write a news article about who showed up at their birthday party, right? Like, none of that is really news. And there is a lot of news to report on. But no one wants to watch a constant stream of war. So we're going to create little pseudo events to fill in because we want people to be engaged. We want people to watch and be entertained and stick around. They're also going to use clickbait, of course. That's a pretty typical thing. I'm sure everyone knows what that is. We're coming back to this speed to give reports, right? So, like, everyone's racing each other to be the first one to get out the news story. And oftentimes what will happen is they'll be the first one to get it out, and it'll come out with a lot of inaccurate information. We see this happen a lot when we're talking about school shooting events, where everyone's just trying to get the information out as quickly as possible. In this case, less likely for entertainment and more likely for safety purposes. But even still, like, you're trying to get it out so quickly, and we're just missing in massive chunks of information. The biggest one recently with the Uvalde, where it came out that the police officers actually never responded to the call. And they did respond to the call, but then they waited 3 hours to go in. But then actually a couple officers went in immediately. And this information comes out in like little touches, where if we all just waited like a day, maybe, right, all of the information would come out together and it would come out accurately. And this is where a lot of speculation happens and a lot of misinformation happens. If I read an article that says they didn't get on scene until 3 hours after it had been reported, but you read the most update article that said they actually went in as soon as they got the call, right? Like, I believe that I got my information from the news, and so do you. And so we're debating this. But if everyone just waited until we had all of the information, that wouldn't be part of misinformation, and people wouldn't be spreading things that did or did not happen. They also use small portions of facts to reach specific audiences or internal goals. This is tied into narrowcasting, which is where you're targeting a specific audience. Another good example, right, we're going to keep talking about this. Sorry, it's just on my mind recently, would be like guns, specifically shootings. If we're talking or targeting narrowcasting to an audience that is much more geared towards Second Amendment rights and wanting to ensure everyone has access to their rights, maybe we're going to talk more about the mental state of the person who committed the crime. Or we're going to talk more about, like, why they did what they did or what their motivation was. Whereas if you're targeting to an audience that's a little bit more anti-Second Amendment, which I think is a generalization, but even still, like, we're talking to an audience that's more for, like, background checks and, like, limiting the availability of types of guns or types of ammo, whatever have you, we're going to talk probably more about how they acquired the weapon or where the weapon came from or what kind of weapon it was, how many people were injured, how many people, unfortunately, are deceased, right? Like, what are the implications of this? I hope you're seeing that connection there, like what the difference is. No one's saying that this didn't happen. Everyone's reporting that it happened, but how they're approaching the information will probably be a little bit different, determining who they're trying to target. So now we're going to go into a section I like to call the news aggregates. And there are just these 4 definitions, and I just kind of designed it like this because I thought it was fun. But this isn't on a chronological line or anything. But the idea behind news aggregates are that there are 4 terms you need to know: selective news feeds, selective perception, and then bubbles and echoes. I'm sure you've heard of bubbles and echoes before. So selective news feeds is this idea of software algorithm reducing the size of digital news that targets specific information or specific users, right? So like, if I'm interacting over and over again with information about the NFL, like, they're going to keep feeding me information about the NFL. They know that I'm interested in that. And if every time I get a TikTok or a tweet or whatever have you about, like the NBA, and I just scroll right past it, I don't even give it a time of day, maybe I hit not interested, right? They're going to stop showing me that because it's not pulling in my attention. So our news feeds, social media primarily being the main one, but like general news, right? Our home pages of Google, the homepage of CNN, like, they're all doing this. They're targeting, and they're using AI to do that, using it based on what you're interacting with and what you're sticking around to pay attention to. YouTube does it as well. And this is creating a bubble and an echo. Selective perception is more about how the information is coming to you. So there's 3 main terms you need to know under this one. The first one is filtering. This is more about how you are taking it in, right? So selective news feeds is what is being shown to you. Selective perception is how you're taking the information in. A filter is when you're filtering the incoming information, primarily thinking about seeing and hearing what you want. To get off of the controversial stuff for a minute, I'm sure this is controversial for some people, but not quite as controversial. If maybe you like already have a view on football players, right? And the head injuries that they sustain while they're playing. And you already believe that it's a really risky game and it's dangerous and something should be done about it. Every time you see a news article about an NFL player getting hurt, that's what you're going to get, right? Maybe if you read the whole article or you watched the whole video, you would see that, like, this other player tackled them in a way that's really not supposed to be done, and they actually got a penalty for it. But that's not really what you're getting from the story. What you're getting from the story is that this game is risky, this game is dangerous, and players are at risk. So you're seeing and hearing what you want. It doesn't mean that you're not reading the whole article. It doesn't mean that you're not taking the information in, but you're filtering it, right? To you, it doesn't really matter if the player was tackled in a way that's illegal, or it doesn't really matter if they weren't wearing their gear correctly. What's happening is they got hurt, and it's risky. On the other hand, we have what's called lenses, which is changing the incoming stimulus to align with your beliefs. This sounds very similar. It is very similar, but it is a little different. The key part of this, which is on your exam, is that a lens molds information to comply with your personal beliefs. A filter is really only focusing on what you want to focus on. A lens is that you're literally molding the information to comply with your beliefs. So, it's a good example of this. I'm trying to stick away from shootings, but unfortunately this is like the best example. I'm gonna go with it. Sorry in advance. So if you're reading an article about a shooting, right? And they're telling you all of these things that led to it. Maybe the person who committed the event was mentally struggling, right? Maybe they were being bullied. And maybe they were given their gun legally. Maybe their dad gave it to them. Their dad bought it legally. They were allowed to have it. It was a gift. What you're going to get from this is still what you're already believing, right? Similar to narrowcasting. Narrowcasting is how the news is presenting it to you, right? They're targeting their audience. A lenses is really where you're getting the information. So we're going to talk more about the mental challenges and the bullying, or we're going to talk more about it was too easy to acquire this gun. And we're kind of changing the information. I know these two things are very, very similar. So if you have questions distinguishing them, please let me know. But what you really need to pull from this, what will be on your exam, is that a lens is molding information and a filter is seeing what you want, basically. And then the last part is trust. And this comes from expecting persuasion. So an individual is more likely to believe an expert than a layman. If this information is presented to you by a doctor, you're going to believe it more than if I gave this information to you, right? Medical information. But hopefully, right, you're taking what you're learning about government, you're believing a professor a little bit more than you might believe your best friend. And so selective perception is who you're trusting to give you this information. And a lot of trust recently has been deteriorating because everyone is expecting persuasion. Everyone is expecting that the news is trying to tell them to believe something. When if you alter your thinking to realize that the media is just telling you what to think about, you might have an easier time trusting what you're hearing. You shouldn't always trust what you're hearing, though. You should fact check. I'm going to go over this quickly because I assume most of you are familiar with this. A bubble is surrounding yourself with your own interests and your own ideology, creating a personal support system of yes men. So we see this happen a lot with like dictators, where what they'll do is they'll have their cabinet or their closest allies, their right-hand man, and it will just be someone who is always agreeing with them. Because if you disagree with them, they're going to kick you out, right? They're going to tell you to go. I don't want you helping me anymore. I don't want you in my cabinet. You're not advising me correctly because you're not telling me what I want to hear. And by getting rid of all the naysayers, you're creating a circle around you of people who are just going to tell you what you want to hear. Think about it like joining a club, right? If you're really interested in the environment, you're going to join the Sierra Club. And everyone in the Sierra Club also really cares about the environment. So there's going to be a constant circle of discussion that the environment needs work and that we're scared of climate change and that here are all the issues. And everyone's just around each other saying the same thing. An echo chamber is that you're only getting involved in things that center things you already agree with. Again, two very, very similar things. The difference mainly being like how you are handling the information. But oftentimes these are used interchangeably. So an echo doesn't allow for free movement. You fall into insulated or isolated information. And we often think of what we call a groupthink. So you just start to think, or you allow one person to speak for you. We see this happen a lot in like group projects, where if you're in a group project with 3 or 4 people and one person just starts speaking up and they're acting very confident and they just kind of know what's going on, most people will fall in line behind them and they'll just do what they say. They'll let them move the assignments around. They'll let them discuss the topic they're going to talk about. They could be completely wrong, but because of how they're kind of taking the lead and they're acting so confident, most people will fall in the line and they'll just do what they want. It may oftentimes come from laziness, like you just don't care enough, but it may often also times come from you just trust this person. Again, these things are very interchangeable. People use them interchangeably. A bubble is like your yes men. It's people around you that are just going to tell you what you want to hear all the time. An echo is, again, very similar. People are just giving each other the same information over and over again. Most times, I would say your bubbles are going to be like your real life people. Like this might be the main difference actually. Your bubbles are your people actually around you, the people you talk to every single day, where your echoes are probably going to be like your online stuff, where you're getting your information from, right? So if you're only interacting with certain news sites, or you're only interacting with certain algorithms, that's going to create your echo. Whereas your bubble is going to be more of your like personal network, people you talk to every single day. It's a lot easier to fall into an echo than it is to fall into a bubble, especially when you're still in school. Because an echo, again, primarily, a lot of it nowadays is going to be online. But a bubble oftentimes is like this personal network that you've created. Again, similar to the filters and lenses, if this doesn't make sense, if you're not understanding, please let me know. We can go over it again. But I think it makes more sense that these two are much more interchangeable than a filter and a lens is. Okay, real quickly, we're going to talk about the processes of mass media. So agenda setting, priming, gatekeeping, and then framing. Agenda setting is the process by which individuals or institutions come to acknowledge the importance of an issue or problem and then define this importance for the public, right? So we're talking about how they're deciding whether they're going to report on something, how they're deciding what people should think about. People are really, really interested, unfortunately, in shootings. Whether that's because they are finding an argument to make more restrictions, whether that's because they're trying to find an argument that it's actually nothing to do with restrictions, it's about mental health access and like family relationships, whatever it is, right? We're going to pull people in. That's going to give information. Whereas like the conflict in Belarus, probably not as much. The conflict in Ukraine, still happening. We don't get news about it every single day. That's no longer determined like the most important thing, even though it is still happening. So agenda setting is just how people in news media are acknowledging what is important to talk about and what is not important to talk about. What's going to get us views and audience, what isn't. Priming is the technique where exposure to one influences a subsequent response. So media is affecting what issues are like most used. When something says breaking news, you're immediately going to think it's more important. And that's pretty much all priming is how they're going to introduce this information to you. Maybe they'll tell you a story, a really emotional story about a school shooting before they give you the news on the legislation that Congress is trying to write to restrict your gun access. They're going to put breaking news before something to tell you that it's super important. They're going to put something on the front page of the paper so you know it's super important. Priming is just how they're going to influence your response. Gatekeeping, you've heard me reference before. This is media institutions controlling the flow of information. So they're controlling what gets reported and what order it's reported, what is and isn't important for the news cycle. If media is deciding not to report on a bill that Congress is passing, they're essentially saying this isn't that important. Most people aren't going to care about it. And if you're one out of a billion people who would care about it, unfortunately, you're going to miss out because media is choosing what to report. And this used to be, right, primarily acting in a good thing. to hold government accountable. Recently, this is done more to push their ideological agendas. And then the last one is framing, which is emphasizing particular aspects to influence the public's perception. Big part of war stories, right? If we're talking about the war in Vietnam, it was very, very unpopular. And so the news will often report on, like, oh, we won this battle, or this many enemies were killed, or like, oh, this many soldiers came home today. Like, they're going to push certain aspects to help your perception. If a war is super unpopular, they're going to talk about all of the victories. But if a war is super, like maybe, oh, no war is popular. That was a bad example. I shouldn't have said that. But maybe if we want people to pull out of the war, we're going to start talking about casualties, right? Which is where we really see the story of the Vietnam War kind of flip. We were talking about victories and the battles that had been won and how we were going to be out super soon. It was going to be over soon. And then the tide shifted. I'm so sorry if you can hear that motorcycle. The tide shifted and protests started getting bigger and people started getting hurt and media started having a bigger role in it. And all of a sudden we were reporting on the casualties. And the goal behind that was trying to influence government, media and the people working together to influence government to try to pull out of the war. Right? So how we're emphasizing different pieces of a story will impact what the public believes about it. We're generally guiding the individual's processing of information. Political portrayal in news often looks like a horse race journalism, which is the media's focus on the competitive aspects rather than actual policy decisions. So we're not talking about, oh, Harris's policy says this and Trump's policy says this. We say, oh, Harris is winning in this state and Trump is winning in this state and the polling shows Trump 5% ahead. No, Harris is 4% ahead. Right? Like, we're not talking about the actual policy. We're not talking about bills that are being passed. It's, oh, Republicans have the majority and they're getting all these laws passed, and Democrats have the majority and they're getting all these laws passed. What are the laws? What is actually important? Whether the Democrats are winning or the Republicans are winning, or what bills are being passed that are going to change the way we live. And horse race journalism is focused on that competitive aspect of who's winning, who's doing more. The issue with this is that it often increases negativism and cynicism, because there's a tendency of reporters to be cynical and focus on the negatives, right? Oh my God, we're losing, or oh my God, like they're not doing enough, they need to do more. Primarily because the idea of fear motivates voters more than anything else. And we'll talk about that when we talk about voter behavior later in the semester. But this is why they do it, because fear is motivating voters. So if we talk about, right, how maybe if we're rooting for Trump, okay? And if we talk about how he's losing in all of these toss-up states, and the polling is down, and God forbid Harris wins, then we're going to fall into a communist dictatorship, right? Like, that's going to scare people, and they're probably going to turn out to vote because they don't want a communist dictatorship. And both sides do it. Oh my God, Harris is down in these states, and we have to go out and turn out the vote, or we're going to get a fascist religious dictator. And they're going to say the same thing. And that's going to work because people don't want a fascist religious dictator. So they're using fear. So primarily our news is going to be more negative and more cynical because fear will motivate voters. The availability of news, really quickly. We have cable stuff, we have streaming, and social media, which is creating more news saturation than ever. This could be good, right? Because now people have more access to more things. But it could also be bad because it's so overwhelming and people aren't able to find information quite as quickly. Or maybe they're going to miss out on some pieces of things because there's just so much happening and so many different sources are putting out so many different stories. Again, political media is promoting fear because fear works. Fear turns out the vote. Here are just some pros and cons of getting your stuff from social media. A pro is the ease of organizing, the message distribution. It's super easy to fundraise through social media. And then the limitless access to information. You can just keep finding stuff and it never runs out. The cons are obviously the echoes and the bubbles that you could fall into, the misinformation because anyone and everyone is just putting whatever they want out, and then the conspiracy theories that ultimately will stem from everyone and anyone putting out whatever they want. One of our last slides is just about politicians versus the media. This is all based on realism, right? Realism, the idea of fighting for power and having the most power. Our media sources and our politicians are constantly fighting for that control of power, but they need each other, right? The news media wants to be more powerful than politicians, and politicians want to be more powerful than the news media, but they need each other to do things. If politicians aren't doing anything that media can report on, media's not going to make any money, they're not going to have an audience. If the media isn't reporting on anything the politicians are doing, the politicians don't have a platform. They don't have anywhere to get their message out. So even though they're constantly in this battle for control, they do need each other to essentially get out their message and get the audience that they need. So who has control? If you're in a bubble and an echo and you're only hearing what you want to hear, does anyone actually have control over their intake of information? This is just a rhetorical question I want to put out to you because especially as social media news is growing in prevalency, a lot of people don't even know that they're finding themselves in bubbles and echoes, and you just don't think about it. But if you're only hearing what you want to hear, or you're only hearing things that you're interested in, are you really aware of the information that's coming to you? And are you truly informed on the state of the world, on the state of the country, on the state of our government? Just another side note, journalists and academics are always the first to go down. In a dictatorship, we see this happen with all... I'm sorry, I just hurt myself. We see this happen with all dictatorships, right? We're thinking about even in the World War II or the World Wars, World War I included Mussolini, and then Stalin, and then Hitler, right? And also in the South American, Latin American countries. When these dictatorships are coming to power and they're surrounding themselves with all of these yes men, people who are just going to tell them what they want to hear, journalists and academics, people who are very informed and serving to work as a gatekeep to check what the government is doing and how the leaders are ruling, will often be the first imprisoned. Because if there's, right, if the media is reporting on, oh, this dictator is trying to take over and he's spending all this money and he's fighting this war and committing this genocide, and the journalists and the academics are reporting that this is happening, it's a lot easier to build up a resistance super early to tear it down when the dictatorship is still in a weak position. But if they take down all the journalists, they take down all the academics, and no one has a chance to get this information out before it's a stable dictatorship that has stability and a cabinet of yes men and a military who will do whatever it wants, then they're able to hold that power. And even at that point, when revolution does come to happen, people are protesting, people are trying to take back their government, right? It's too late. So that's primarily why journalists and academics are always the first to go down, because they're the ones who are dissuading information. And they're trusted, generally, because they're the gatekeepers and they're experts and they're informed. That's all I have for this lecture. So thanks for hanging out. As I've noted before, remember, our exam is this Friday. It's on Brightspace. And then the week after, we have our Federalist Papers. And then next lecture, I'll talk about our essay. But it's pretty self-explanatory. Content, go down here to essays, paper 1. Usually I make you choose, like I make you vote, but I think I've decided you can just do whichever one you want. So you can do either or. And then you just open the rubric, and here it is. I'm not giving you like a question or a prompt. The rubric is your question or your prompt. So you should be able to go through each one of these little sections and answer the question. And there's one on ideology and citizenship, talking about American values, political culture, the quadrants, policy examples, and then the other one is on media, which we just talked about. So you're going to talk about media cycles, that's punctuated equilibrium and issue attention. You're going to talk about why media is the fourth branch, which is right because they're pushing policy through all of these means. Your three aspects could be any of the definitions I just gave you: tactics, processes, political betrayal, whatever you want. They need to be connected. And then analyzing its role in government. So that's basically it. I will go over APA in our next slide, or our next lecture. But until then, you could look over your rubrics if you want and ask questions. I think you should focus on the exam and the Federalist Papers first. But perfect. That's all I have for you. So if you have questions about any of these things, let me know. Exam's on Friday. You can turn in extra credit. Extra credit will be added to like whatever you want, really. If you do pretty poorly on the exam, we can add it to the exam. If you do really well on the exam, you want to save it for later, we can add it to something else. And if we never use it, I'll just add it to the very end of your grade at the end of the class. So turn in for extra credit if you'd like. If we do other debates, I'll do the same thing. You can do extra credit. And then Federalist Papers, here's your essay, and the movie is Spotlight. So check your sources, see if you can get access to it. After you do that, read up on it, read some reviews, make sure that you're good with it, and then come talk to me if you're uncomfy. Perfect, cool. See you next week.